Okay, I think we've got everybody. We'll start with reviewing the essentials for writing a proper offer. This is kind of, I would call this your cheat sheet on what CAR forms that you need and other forms that you need for any offer that you do. And we'll just start with number one, and we're going to do it practically. We'll work it through just like I'd be writing an offer. So we're going to start with, I'm going into the MLS. We're going to pull up a property. Of course, you pick the one that you want to write the offer on. I'm just picking one that it's easy. So when you go into the MLS and you're looking at the listing, you see right here the green button that says make an offer.
Yes.
Can everybody see that? So I'm not going to go to that yet. We're going to go over here to the APN. The assessor's parcel number is right here, the 4134017-072. So this is where you get the property profile sheet. You click on this, and the reason that we pull the property profile sheet is we want to verify who the owner is. So here we can see that the legal owner is Miriam Brock. And I always take a look, I go down and look at the history of the property just to see what's going on. How much do they owe on it? When did they buy it? This section here where it says estimated value, these are some quick numbers to show you that this is probably the price range in which the property is going to sell. Then down here at the bottom, you can see when it was last sold in 2004, and it sold for $399. So you can see what the prior owner paid for it. I'm sorry, $395 right here, November 24, 2004, and it closed in January of 05. Again, when you get down here to the bottom, you're going to see what are the recent loans on the property. Down here, you'll see if it's in foreclosure. You'll see if it's in notice of default. You'll see how much money that the last loan was that they had on the property. So the key takeaway from this form is double checking your ownership. That's why you look at the property profile, to double check the property's ownership and look and see if there's any notice of default or anything like that showing on the property. This would be for another class, but up here you could click on comparables, and you could look at comps that the MLS pulls automatically for you through this system. So we now know that Miriam Brock is the owner. We're going to go back to the listing. And let me get back there. Come on. The next item on our list is the listing agent profile. So down here at the bottom of your listing, you can see the listing agent is Tudor Martin. This is her broker's number, her broker ID number, and this is her license number. So I always go to the licensee, and I want to see who I'm dealing with. How long have they been licensed? Do they have any public comments about them, etc. So you can see that Tudor was licensed in June of 1996. So you're dealing with an agent that has almost 25 years experience. That's usually a good thing. So again, the other thing that I'm going to look for here is the address, if I need it, for the paperwork of the brokerage. But if you do the offer the way I show you, you won't need to write this down. But again, I just go here to double check the agent's history and their broker. That's number one on our essentials list. Number two is a term sheet, which the term sheet is the spreadsheet that I sent you. So this is it could be an Excel sheet, it could be a Mac number sheet. You can set it up any way that you like, but basically I put all the main information for my offer on this term sheet. So when we fill out the term sheet, you're going to need to know the seller's name, the buyer's name, the price, your escrow time, the good faith deposit, how much are they going to put down for the good faith, the EMD. Then if there's going to be a down payment, you would put that here. So this is a VA loan, so they're not really putting anything else down. But normally this number here is probably going to be anywhere from 3.5% to 20%. Proof of funds. In this box, you would put attached because you're going to attach it to the offer. But let's say it's a gift and you don't have the proof of funds yet. Then you would put a little explanation in here. Gift coming from parents, letter to be supplied through escrow. You just, basically this is a quick down and dirty of what all the main terms are of the offer. And the reason that I do this is I first fill it out, then I send it to my buyer to review, and that drives questions with your buyer. They'll say, you know, why do I need 17 days? Or is it 17 plus 17 plus 21? It'll drive questions from your buyers, especially when you're working with first-time buyers, so that you can start explaining the process to them. So I typically, the contract defaults to 17 days for physical. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, 17 days for physical, 17 days for appraisal, and 21 days for loan. Now, in a competitive situation, you're going to shorten these dates. But right now with COVID, I would definitely try to keep your dates more extended because of just, it takes longer to do things these days. So again, this is a discussion you're going to have with your buyer and with your buyer's lender. So I'm going to go to Tom and say, can you get this loan appraisal done and approval done in a shorter period of time? What are you comfortable with? If we need to, because it's a competitive situation. Always have a lender outlined. Your buyer can change the lender when they get into, you know, they don't have to go with the first lender that they meet with, but you want to get them to narrow in their choice as quickly as possible, because I use my lender as a partner when I'm trying to get my offers accepted. I copy the lender on the offer when I'm sending it out to the listing agent, and I say, please feel free to contact Tom directly, and he will show you or explain to you the qualifications that this buyer has to buy this property. So that's where your lender comes into play to help you get your offer accepted. And a lot of times the lender is a key asset in helping you get your offer accepted, because the listing agent will then feel comfortable with who they're dealing with. I don't encourage, for you new agents, when you've got buyers that want to do everything online, I tell them, work with somebody that you can talk to. Don't be doing everything like through Quicken Loans, et cetera. Because when you're working with a mortgage broker versus a direct lender, a mortgage broker has a lot more variety of loans that they can offer. They have a lot more resources that they can offer. And when you're dealing just straightforward with Chase or Wells Fargo, Bank of America, if that loan goes south, you got to start all over with somebody new. So if you're working with a loan broker and you need to switch paths, that loan broker can go to another investor, and he's already got your client's file ready to go because he's already put it through the first investor. Then down, if you get down towards the bottom of your term sheet, you're going to fill in any specific items that are relative to the property. So if you want a home warranty, you could put in here buyer's choice. And then you put, this one's a more expensive one because it's a duplex. That's why it's at $650. The standard home warranty is going to be in the $400 to $500 range. Then personal property. Personal property would be any items you're going to ask for in the offer that aren't considered real property. So in this section, I would put washer, dryer, stove, refrigerator, anything that's not normal, that doesn't come with the property that you want to be included in the price. Then the next section is seller concessions. So you can have seller concessions and buyer concessions. So a seller concession could be, this one is section 1 termite because it's a VA loan and we have to have termite done. In this section, you could have that the seller is going to pay part of the buyer's closing cost. That could go in that section. A buyer concession, something that could be a buyer concession might be, let's say you're in a competitive offer situation and the seller wants to rent back for 2 weeks, and they don't want to pay anything. That could be a buyer concession, that the buyer is allowing a rent back for free for 2 weeks. That would be the example of one of those. Termite, again, if you're asking the seller to pay for it, then you should let the seller pick the termite company. If the buyer is going to do their own inspection, then it could be buyer's choice, or you'd fill in a name. Escrow and title, again, these are my preferred vendors, but you could have a different vendor, or often you're going to see in a competitive situation, it's going to say seller's choice, because the selling side for years have been driving the choices of these vendors. But don't hesitate to put in your own favorite vendor and let them counter you if you sometimes they do go through. Natural hazard disclosure, again, seller's choice. That's standard. You need an NHD on every offer. It's state statute. Government mandatory retrofits, again, the norm is for the seller to pay for those. And sometimes a buyer will pay for it if you're dealing with an investor who's maybe buying a property for cash and they're going to flip it. Oftentimes the buyer will take on this responsibility. Then we have the listing agent and then the buyer's agent, and then we put a deadline for the offer expiration. Does anybody have any questions about this form?
One more time, the termite, we had a conversation about this matter, but normally sellers should take care of termites, but still they are negotiating and the seller tries to avoid his or her responsibility about termite matter.
So normally, Adam, on termite, in recent years, I've been leaving it off the offer, and then we do our physical inspection and bring a termite person in to represent the buyer. But in a VA loan situation, which is what I was just showing everybody, you must have the termite work complete. So you want to put that in up front because you don't want it to be a negotiating point later. You want to make sure that the seller understands that we can't get this loan approved unless we have the termite work completed. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but basically, in my opinion, it should be seller responsibility. Why we bring it to the negotiation level to just buyer said, I need seller take care of it, and then seller said, no, I'm not gonna do anything. Buyer, if you want, take care of it. My point is to avoid to get that matter. What should we do at the beginning?
So it's probably changed. I know it's probably been at least 5 years when the contract changed. We used to always write contracts and say seller was responsible for termite section 1 work. And then what CAR, California Association of Realtors, decided when they changed it was sellers were starting to balk at this because they didn't know what that number was. You know, sometimes it might be under $1,000, and then I've seen termite work $10,000. So the sellers didn't want to, we changed it because of not making the seller responsible for a number that they don't know. So that's where I say now I negotiate it when I do the repairs, because we decide at that point what repair work needs to be done relative to termite.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So we've done the property profile, we've looked at the agent, we've done our term sheet, we've sent the term sheet out to the buyers so that the buyers can review it and sign off on it. And then now we're ready. The buyers have agreed to what we have said. Now we're going to start on our offer. So we're back in the MLS. We're back at the property. And right here it says make an offer. So we click on make an offer. And the MLS will take you directly to your zip forms. You can see that it's going to my zip forms, the California Association of Realtors. So we go into, we're now in Zip Form Plus. And you can see here that the MLS automatically populated various information about the property. We've got the MLS number, we've got the parcel number down here, the address. Then it has the offer date, the offer expire date. These dates are in the deal, so this we would fill in, and we're going to do that on another page. I'm going to show you. This information, you don't need to fill all this in on this. I like to go then to the cover sheet, which is next on my list, and the cover sheet right here. You click on it and it goes into your file. So this is automatically populating with some things that shouldn't be there because there's a glitch in my system. But basically you would go down this sheet and you would start filling in the buyer's information. Now the main information that you want to put in is the legal name of the buyer, their cell phone number, their email address, and then you're going to click this box here. That means that they're going to do e-signatures. So they can be, we can do everything via DocuSign. The seller's information automatically populated. Can everybody make sure they're on mute? Because I keep hearing something in the background. And then unmute yourself when you want to ask the question. So the seller's information automatically populated. Again, we're not going to be doing e-signatures with the seller because we're representing the buyer. So that's page 1. Page 2, here you've got your MLS number, the property address, the APN number. It tells you how much the HOA is monthly. This person who was working with this file before me, they went ahead and put a price in here. The purchase agreement date, you would put today's date. Then you've got your price, you've got your deposit. Now keep in mind that your deposit is your EMD, your earnest money deposit, and normally we want our buyers to be putting in 3%. That's our goal. Then we have our offer date. Again, we'll change it today, today's date, the expiration. On your expiration date for your offer, the contract defaults to 3 days. If it falls on a weekend, you could move it to Monday. If you want it to be shorter, you could move it to Friday, and then you put it to expiration time. Then when we get to escrow information, in this instance, The person put in seller's choice. None of this other information is relevant. That should be out of there. Then this is already filled in. Again, you would fill this in. You would put Keller Williams Inglewood. You always need to use Inglewood with Keller Williams. Because of our franchise agreement, each office is independently owned, and we need to make sure that we use the one from our franchise. That's what corporate wants. Then you're going to put the broker number, which is our corporate number for our office. That's going to be the same on every offer. And then you're going to put your license number here. And then you're going to fill in all your information. You can see that for the listing agent, everything was filled in automatically. I don't normally fill in the lender information here. I don't see a need for it, nor appraisal. Then you're going to fill in the title. Again, this is a competitive offer situation that was being written up, and seller's choice was put in there. But I could put lawyer's title, Kevin Sales, if that's what I wanted. Pest control, you could put buyer's choice or seller's choice. Disclosure information is your NHD. Home warranty, I typically put buyer's choice, and then let the buyer, we help the buyer decide which home warranty company to go with. And then lastly, you have Doverwood Townhomes. That's the name of the HOA. So on your cheat sheet or your checklist, this is number 3 of the checklist. So you come back up here and you go back, and then normally you would go over to all forms, and you would click on purchase agreement. It's already in here, but that's where you find it. Whenever you're looking for a form, you can type in this box right here. So for example, number 10 on my list is RCSD-S. Oops. RCSD. I hate these automatic populating things. So then you can see right here, the minute you start putting the initials in for a form, you can just add the form. You don't have to type out the whole word. That's why it's good to start to learn the car initials as you start to do business. Start to learn what the abbreviations are for every form. So we go and we open up our purchase agreement form. In the purchase agreement form, so the very first form is number 5 on our list. This is our agency agreement. And so you don't have to go find the form. Once you pull in the purchase agreement, the form pulls in with it. So basically you're going to go down and make sure that the information is filled in, the buyer's name, and then it's checked. Then we have your brokerage, broker number, you, and your license number. So that all comes from that cover sheet that you did. This is why I like to do the cover sheet first. Then everything gets filled in as you go down. The next document is number 6 on our list. This is possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. And this form is telling your clients that you may be working with more than one buyer on this property. You also may be working with more than one seller on other properties. So it's saying that you're working with multiple buyers, multiple sellers, or you could be doing a dual agency. A dual agency is where you represent the buyer and the seller. Keep in mind that it's also considered a dual agency if you're working with someone else under my broker's license. So if Chloe and Adam, for example, are both doing a deal, one's representing the buyer and one's representing the seller, then that is considered a dual agency. So again, you're double checking to make sure that everything is filled in. The dates are going to populate when we send it out for signature, so you don't need to fill the date in on the signature lines. The next document is,
Mike, before
yeah,
going further, if you remember, we had the experience if we have three buyers, so we don't have a space for the third one. Should we add
um,
an
we'll go, that's a good question. We'll go back and show that,
okay.
to do that. We can do that right now, and then we'll come back to this. Go back. What I'm trying to do right now is get back to the front page of the offer. So I'm starting back at square one. So you see on this page here, we could add more parties over here on the left. So we can add buyer number 3, buyer number 2, buyer number 4. So you can add another buyer to the contract on this very front page.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So we'll go back into the file. We're on the purchase agreement, and we're going through the various documents that we have on our list. So we just did number 6. Now we're going to do number 7. Which is wire fraud advisory. One important issue to remember with wire fraud is always tell your buyers that they need to call the escrow company to verbally confirm wire instructions. Some escrow companies will send an email. It usually should be password protected, but again, don't you pass on wire instructions to any of your clients. They should get them direct from the escrow companies. And there are escrow companies that are going to send them to you and tell you to give them to your buyer. And your response back to the escrow company is, we are not allowed to pass along wire instructions. Here is my buyer's phone number, and here is their email address. Please make sure that you reach out to them direct to give them the wire instructions. Then you also send an email to your client telling them, verify with the escrow company before you send the wire. And you can see right here, number 2, do not ever wire or electronically transfer funds prior to calling to confirm the transfer instructions. Only use a phone number you were provided previously. Then now we're at our purchase agreement, and you can see that the date automatically populated, the buyer populated the address, the parcel number, and everything that we filled in on the cover sheet gets transferred over here. But you need to come back here and look at things and make sure that things are right. So for example, here, the purchase price is $637.5. It's a 20-day escrow. Typically, you're going to have a 20-day, a 30-day, a 45-day. You're not going to normally put a date. And the reason for that is, unless it's a cash deal, you're not going to know when you want to be able to time all your contingencies to when the offer gets accepted. So if, for example, here I put 20 days from today, and then we don't get this offer signed off for another 5 days because we're going back and forth, then we've lost 5 days of our escrow period. So that's why I recommend that you put a day, not a date. So here you have your seller brokerage firm. They are the listing agent. They represent the seller in the seller's agent. And then we have Keller Williams Inglewood that is representing the buyer, and Eric is the agent representing the buyer. So he put down that the good faith deposit is $19,000 on this transaction, which is just right around 3%. I recommend you leave this blank. Now, when you leave it blank, this basically is saying that the buyer will deliver to escrow via wire within 3 business days of acceptance. So sometimes the buyer is going to say to you, no, I don't want to do a wire. I want to do a cashier's check. So you would hit the box cashier's check, and then under or, I would put buyer to deliver cashier's check directly to escrow. You do not handle any checks. You don't handle any deposits. You never take a check from a client. They all go from the client to escrow or from the client to the landlord. Don't take checks. That's the golden rule. The next item. I'm sorry, Lynette, can you speak up again?
You said don't put cashier's check. The buyer's going to give a cashier's check.
Again, you would have that buyer deliver the check to escrow.
Right.
And I mean, they can put it in the mail. Another point here too could be maybe the buyer doesn't have $19,000 available right away. He's got to transfer something from his stock accounts. So you could change it to 5 business days, or but explain to the listing agent why you're putting more time to get the deposit in. Because what you're going to find is some investors are going to play games, and they don't want to put their deposit in until they've gone through the house, and then they don't open escrow. So each case is different, but you want to be able to represent to the seller what's really going on here.
Got it.
Now, maybe the buyer's got $5,000 available now, and he's going to have $14,000 in 10 days because he's got something coming in. That's where you would do increased deposit on B.
Right.
So we might have $5,000 in 3A and then $14,000 in 3B, and we would put the time frame within that it's going to come in. Now, on a single family to 4-unit property, I don't recommend that you ever have a deposit more than 3%. The reason is if the buyer backs out of the transaction after they've removed all their contingencies, they are liable for 3%. But you don't want to have them have more money in escrow that ties it up, that ties up their money while they're trying to work out canceling of a deal. Right here, Eric had clicked all cash offer. We're going to turn that off. So down in the next section, you would click this box if it was an all cash offer. And again, you're going to want to show proof of funds, preferably with the offer. And that would be down here, verification of down payment and closing cost or funds. That would be 3H, verification attached. In clause 3D as in dog, here, some of the important things to consider is one is if it's a VA or FHA loan, you're going to check one of these boxes because there's a special addendum that goes with it. Over here, you're going to put the loan amount. So for example, let's say it's an 80% loan and 637.5. A lot of times agents forget to fill this box in when you're new. So the loan amount is 510. And then as you go down, you then see here, the buyer still needs to come to closing with an extra $106,700 in order to make up the purchase price. So these 3 numbers, the initial deposit, the first loan, and the balance for closing should all equal the purchase price. Now, also in this section, we may see, but because interest rates have been so stable and low for years, we haven't used this. But back when I started 20 years ago, interest rates were 7 and 8%. And we would put a cap here. We would say that the buyer shall get a loan at not higher than 5% if rates are going up, and maybe your buyer only qualifies at 5% or less. That's when you would use this box to say that the buyer has to get a loan. Well, it would be right here, 5%. That's on a 30-year fixed. And then this is if you did an adjustable rate loan, but I wouldn't even go there. So again, you would only put a cap on it in a market where rates are going crazy and the buyer only qualifies at a certain rate, because it does limit your offer. When there's other offers that don't have this, they're going to look at those offers before the offer that has a restriction. This term that's in here is for an investor. So a lot of your investors are cash buyers, but they reserve the right to get financing during escrow, but it won't delay the escrow. So that's how you would write that up if you had an investor. Now, what savvy sellers will want to know is if you really are going to get a loan, they're going to want to know that. They're going to want to know that they've got to give me proof that they've got the cash, but if they're going to go for a hard money loan, then I'm going to want to know who they're dealing with as the listing agent. So now we come down to page 2, we talked about verification of the funds. So for the actual offer, in this offer, we would want to show 106,000 plus the 19,000. So we want to show bank statements, asset statements, retirement account, anything that shows 130,000 is what you can show. Now, I've had buyers give me like 10,000 from this account, 10,000 from this account, but then they had one 401k that had 400,000 in. Well, then I'm just going to show the 400,000 from the 401k. I'm not going to show all these different bank accounts because we can prove that they have the money to do the deal. So simplify it in that instance. So when we talked earlier about appraisal contingency, this is our first contingency period.
I'm sorry, Michael, before past this part, when you click on the FHA or VA box, so we have to fill up another form, isn't it?
So I just clicked on it, and see, it says it was just added to the file.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we'll go through that form when we get back to that section. Okay? Thank you. So when we talk about contingency periods and default periods, so 3I, appraisal contingency and removal. If you don't fill in anything, there's always going to be a default date. So this says within 17 days of acceptance of the offer, the appraisal contingency will be removed. So if I want to shorten that, I would put in 14 days. Again, it's going to depend on what's going on with the market at the time, what time of year you're at. Like, for example, from the middle of December till the first week of January, we've got all those various holidays. So you need to make accommodation for holidays and things like that for when you're putting in appraisal contingencies and loan contingencies. It's standard for the buyer to apply for the loan within 3 days. I just leave it. And then if they've already been pre-approved, which you really definitely want your buyers to be pre-approved, you are going to click this box that says letter attached, and then you're going to supply the letter from your lender outlining that your buyer is qualified and pre-approved. You don't want a pre-qualification letter. You want a pre-approval letter. In today's financing, most lenders can pretty much underwrite the loan up front. All they need is the property, the purchase agreement, the appraisal, and title. So they can get your buyer underwritten. And by underwriting your buyer, what I mean is they're already checking employment. They've run their credit. They've seen their bank statements. They've seen their tax returns. So your buyer is fully ready to go for approval. All they need is what I just said, the purchase agreement, and then an appraisal and a title. So again, the next big contingency period is your loan contingency. 21 days is the standard, is the default. This is often shortened. He has no loan contingency. We're taking that out because this isn't a cash deal. And so again, you would fill in a date here. You could leave it at 21 or fill in a shorter date. On loan and appraisal, I keep them as long as possible. On physical inspection, I will shorten because you have more control over that process. Provided that you have access to the home, you can shorten your physical inspection periods. We'll talk more about that when we get to that section. Sale of the buyer's property, clause 4A. This is a section that you would use if your buyer had to sell their house. So I've got my house on the market, I'm selling it, and I want to buy a new house, then this comes into play. It doesn't happen, honestly, all that often, but when it does, you can always reach out to me and we can talk it through. Addendums and advisories. So section 5 is the place to put any other forms that we're using that don't come in with the normal offer. So for example, I pulled in FHA form. So I'm going to put FHA/VA. I also pulled in RCSD-S, and then I'm going to say car forms. So these now become a legal part of this contract. In any boxes you check for forms, you want to make sure that it's with the final offer, because the lender is going to want to see any forms that are notated on the document. So in the same respect, there may be something you don't want to deal with the lender. For example, if your buyer it's an unusual situation, but Chloe ran into it recently where the buyer paid the commission. So we were trying to leave that out of the lender and outside of escrow. So we did a separate addendum that wasn't notated in the contract. So there are instances where you're going to want to keep something separate. And again, you should take advice from myself on that. Other terms could be anything that's out of the ordinary that doesn't come up in any of your clauses in here. So for example, a lot of multifamily properties, most of them you're going to put an offer in subject to inspection. So that means that the buyer will get to see the property after the offer is accepted. Now, I would put subject to inspection within 3 business days of acceptance. That way you put a time frame on it, there's a beginning and an end, and it puts pressure on the seller to get you into the property quickly. This is very common on investment properties and properties where maybe you've got an issue with family staying there that aren't supposed to be there, or it really could be any instance. A tenant that isn't very cooperative. Subject to inspection is used quite often. And so newer buyers are going to freak out and say, well, how can I make my offer when I haven't seen the place? Especially now with COVID-19. If there's not a virtual tour and there's not pictures, you let your buyer know this is perfectly acceptable. If you go into the property and you don't like it, or you want to change your price, that's something we renegotiate at that point. And if you just plain don't like it, you just don't open escrow. You don't keep going. You don't put your money in. Next section is allocation of cost, inspections, reports, and certificates. So in this section, the first item is your natural hazard disclosure. We have been using America West in our office as a preferred vendor. Most agents don't check this environmental box. I recommend checking it. It only adds about $15 to the report, and it gives your buyer more information on the property. And if the seller balks at it, I just say I'll pay for it, because it's more disclosure that your buyer gets. In the next section here, it might be that we're going to ask the seller to do a termite report. And then we're going to put seller's choice. If your buyer was going to do their own termite report, then you could put buyer and then you could name the company. I do have a long-term relationship with a termite company that will go out for our buyers, and they won't charge you. So if you need the contact for that, you let me know when you're writing an offer, and I'll get you the information. Because a lot of termite companies still do charge to go out to do the report. My relationship with this guy goes back probably 15 years, and he knows he gets enough business, even though he gets does a lot of reports that don't go through. He gets a lot of business in the long run. In this section, no, I'm going to put it down below. Okay, so the next section is government requirements and retrofit. Again, we're going with what the standard is in our marketplace, and the standard is that the seller will pay for smoke alarm, carbon monoxide, water heater bracing, anything that's relative to retrofit that needs to be done. So that's B1. B2 is the cost of compliance with other minimum government inspections, et cetera. So that could be glazing, for example, in the city of Los Angeles. If you have a sliding door and the glass isn't rated to a certain rating, then the seller needs to put glazing on that glass to protect it. So when it shatters, you don't have big pieces of glass. The glazing keeps it together. I had a client 2 years ago in Woodland Hills. They were buying a 1960s house that had a huge front window that went from the floor to the ceiling. And I insisted. The seller didn't want to do that. So I honestly, I think I paid for it, the glazing on that window, because I testified before on glass accidents, and it's not pretty. And a year into them living in that house, it was Easter, and one of the uncles was at the house, and he went to kill a bug on the window, and the whole window shattered. Huge window shattered. And since it had the glazing, it was no problem. Next is escrow and title. There's two things to put in C1. You can either put each pay 50-50, and that means that the buyer will pay 50% and the seller will pay 50%, or you could say each pay their own cost. The reason you do each pay their own cost is depending on who you're dealing with. If you have a seller that's selling multiple properties, they often have a relationship with their escrow company, and they might get a better price than the buyer gets. So they get their price, and then the buyer gets their price. The way that escrow is priced out, it's based on a base price of $200, and then so much per thousand. So it's not like they're cheating the buyer. It's just the seller gets a discount because they do so many deals with that escrow company. So again, it'd be each pay 50-50 or each pay own cost. And again, you can name the escrow company or you can put seller's choice. On clause C2, this is where the seller is going to pay for title insurance. The title insurance that the seller pays for is ensuring the transfer of the title from the seller to the buyer. Also let your buyers know that they're going to pay for title insurance through the bank, for the bank. So that's not on the contract, but that's between their relationship and their lender that they're buying the house from. It'll be part of their closing costs. Then as we go down here to other costs, now other costs, the norm in the city of LA is for the seller to pay the county transfer tax and the city transfer tax. Now in some transactions where it's an investor situation and it's competitive, sometimes the buyer will pay part of these taxes or all of them. It really just depends on how good a deal they're getting and how bad they want the property. But the norm, normally you would put seller to pay these items. Homeowners Association transfer fee. Many HOAs have a transfer fee. So I always recommend that the seller, you click the seller box for the seller to pay. Then you want the seller to pay for the preparing all of the docs. So you can see it's regards to Civil Code 4525. So these are statute items that the seller would normally pay for. Then there's a second type of transfer fee, and this is called a private transfer fee. So typically you might find this, like in our area, the only place I've run into it is Playa Vista. They have a 3/4 of a point transfer fee. So if you're buying the house for $637,000, that's a substantial number. 3/4 of a point of 637,000 is what, 5,000 bucks. It's norm for the seller to pay it, but sometimes it could be buyer and seller. Remember, in real estate, everything is negotiable. So that's why, depending on the transaction, depending on the situation, you could have a combination of these people paying for things. But I'm telling you what the norm is. The next item, seller shall pay for City of Los Angeles 9A report. You think that everybody in the business knows this, but they don't. I've had closings in South LA with agents from Orange County that have no idea what a 9A report is, and a DWP, certificate of clearance. And it's stupid because, I mean, I had one agent from Orange County last year. They didn't want to do the 9A report. They said, I can't go back and ask the seller for any more money. And I said, it's $71. He's like, oh, I'll pay for it. I didn't know. I didn't know to tell them. So again, the more you have in the contract, the better. It just makes everything more clear when you go to negotiate things later. Clause 10 is for a home warranty. And here you're going to look up, our preferred vendor is Old Republic. We have a relationship with them, and they do extra things for our office. We have brochures at the office, which I know nobody's there right now, but you can reach out to the rep, which we can always give you their information. So I'm putting in here 450 Old Republic. I always put upgraded no matter what. And then if there's an AC, you want to note that there's an AC. If there's a pool, you want to note that there's a pool. Some of the other items you can add are limited roof, and that would go under other. So make yourself familiar. Go to Old Republic's home site and take a look at their brochure. They always have downloadable brochures to review. Again, personally, I'm not a big fan of home warranties, but I write them into all my buyers' deals. Unless I'm representing an investor who's going to flip the house, then you're going to check here, buyer waives the purchase of the home warranty. The next section is talking about what's coming with the property and what's being excluded from the property.
Mike, I had a quick question.
Go ahead.
On the other, can you also include like solar panels?
Oh, you mean for coverage?
That's correct.
You mean for home warranty coverage?
Yes.
Honestly, I don't know, Terrence. That's a good question. I always think of them as you go back to the company that installed them.
Okay.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because in this next section we're going to talk about that. So we're talking about things that are included and excluded from the sale. So for the most part, if it's attached to the house, it's included. And the personal property items that typically aren't are stoves, refrigerators, washers, dryers, etc. But here you can see like satellite dishes, air conditioners, door screens, awnings, shutters, window coverings, etc. Here, if you want to exclude items, let's say they have curtains that match, the window coverings match their bedroom set. So down here in letter C, you're going to say seller to remove window coverings in master bedroom. Or we've had an instance recently where the seller wanted the chandelier that was in the dining room. You would put that under clause C. Anything that the seller wants you to limit. Now, you don't, if, let's say the seller, the MLS says it doesn't come with the washer and dryer. Doesn't mean you still can't ask for the washer and dryer. You would still put that in if that's what you want to do. And if the seller doesn't catch it, your buyer gets the washer and dryer. And I've had that happen. It's kind of underhanded, but it's all negotiation. You can ask for anything. Under 3, that would be other additional items. Down here under C, brackets attached to walls, floors, ceilings. Typically, you should check this box. You want them removed and the holes and the damage repaired. Recently, I've had listing agents ask me, can the seller take the TV brackets? And, you know, for the most part, yes. I mean, so if you check this box, they can do it automatically, but we were on a deal where we hadn't checked the box. Clause 9A, this is important for your lenders. If the buyer is getting a loan for their primary residence, you want to make sure that this box isn't checked. So this happens to be an investor, and that's why it says buyer does not intend to occupy the property. So that's an important box when you're doing primary residences for owner-occupied buyers. Number 2, or 9B, seller occupied or vacant property. So if you don't fill in anything on these boxes, it's saying that the seller can stay in possession of the property until 6 p.m. on the day you close. So that means they have to be out by 6 p.m. on the day that the property records. If there's other circumstances, you would change that. Again, it could be that they're going to be out, like it's common, it used to be more common in the Valley that they would get 3 calendar days after close of escrow. So here you would put 3 calendar days, but it's less and less common than it was 20 years ago. So letter C, seller remain in possession after close of escrow. The reason a seller might remain in possession might be that their house isn't ready that they're buying, or maybe they're being transferred and they need another month for the kids to finish school. These could be some of the reasons why a seller is going to stay in possession, or maybe they needed the money from close of escrow to close on their house. So this section is all very important about that. If you can keep it at 29 days or less, it's much simpler. And that's this car form SIP. You click on this and it's like a rental agreement. And then you fill out the rental agreement and it's a 1-page. The minute you go 30 days or longer, it's a 4 or 5 page rental agreement, and it's just more complicated. So if you can keep the seller in possession as short as possible, that's what I recommend. I also recommend that on this form, the SIP form or the RLAS, which means they're going to be there more than 30 days, you always put that the seller will hold back in escrow X amount of dollars. And again, I do it depending on what is your buyer's liability. If your buyer's got a new house payment of $3,000, then I want to make sure that they're holding back at least $5,000 as a deposit, so that if for some reason that seller doesn't move out and they have to go after them, there's some money in escrow that your buyer can go with. I usually start at 10,000 and then I'll come down when if the sellers have a problem with it. Letter D, tenant occupied property shall be vacant at least 5 days prior to close of escrow. Again, sometimes this is 3 days or 1 day. It's all negotiable. But the ideal thing would be make sure that tenant is out of there before you close escrow. Now, the tenant may stay, and the reason the tenant might stay would be tenant remain in possession, and that would be that you're buying a property as a rental property. Typically, lenders will allow a seller to remain up to 59 days before the buyer has to move in. They're going to make the buyer sign a form on their loan agreements, if this is their primary residence, that they're going to move into that house within 60 days of closing. All of this section here is all about state of California statutory disclosures. So this is telling us what forms we have to have with each that the seller will have to give to your buyer, such as lead paint disclosure, real estate transfer disclosure, natural hazard disclosure, mellow roofs if there's mellow roofs. All of these different items will be are required. One issue that I run into every once in a while is the AVID. The AVID is required by the state of California, but sometimes you'll get agents that refuse to do them. And it's frustrating, but an AVID is an agent visual inspection disclosure. It's a 4-page form that you're going to fill out, walking through the property and outlining what you see. You don't have to crawl into the building. You don't have to go into the attic. You just make notations. Bedroom number 1, cracks on wall, or smoke detector missing, window broken. Don't say things like good condition, new paint, or because you don't. First of all, it's subjective, so you don't know how new the paint is. You don't know what does good condition mean. Do things that you can physically see. Broken light switch, missing plate on plug. When you're in bathrooms, no GFI if there's no GFI near the sink or in kitchens. Things like that. They should be specific things. They shouldn't be general. Now, in today's COVID time, we are making considerations on the AVID. Let's say you can't get into the house again. You can do what you did from when you first saw it. Let's say you were there once. You should write some notes down or take pictures with your phone. And then you're going to note that on the form. I was only in the home on this date, and this is from my memory. Or sometimes we're telling people, have the seller walk around the house with you and do a virtual tour, and then you can write things down. So those are some ways to work around this with COVID-19. The statutory disclosures and the lead disclosures, the buyer and seller cannot waive these. So these forms all have to be part of your transaction. And once you get into escrow and you're working with a transaction coordinator through our office, they're going to make sure that you have these proper forms. They're in command. When you go into command, there's a list and you'll see it, but we're not going to go into command today and talk about that. Oh, and Terrence, you brought up here about liened items such as solar panels. So 8.5, this is where the seller should be disclosing to you if there are leases on the property, such as solar panels. And solar panels can either be assumed, where the buyer takes over the lease, or the lease could be paid off at the close of escrow. So that's all negotiable. I sold a property a couple months ago where the solar panels were only a year old. And the buyer, I was the listing agent, the buyer was rather unsophisticated and their agent never asked. And so we just got the buyer to assume the leases. They could have asked for the seller to pay them off. So if you're representing a buyer, you want to try to get the seller to pay it off, but it's not going to happen every time. The other thing that you might see in this section over the last 5 years, I think, or so, they're called hero loans. And unfortunately, people were preyed upon in some instances where they got solar systems or they got all new windows. They might have gotten new HVAC. So these are things that they borrowed against their house, and there's a lien on the house for those items. Again, in all these instances, when I see it, I would try to negotiate it that the seller pay it off. But on the other hand, your buyer's getting something that's relatively new. So you try to go at it to get it paid for, but if you can't, you still try to keep your deal together if it makes sense for your client. Again, here we're talking about natural hazard disclosures, withholding taxes. The withholding taxes are mainly for the seller and whether or not they're a California resident. If they are out of state, there's monies that have to be held back but again, that's through escrow. Megan's Law database disclosure. That's where you can go to meganslaw.ca.gov and see if there's any child offenders, et cetera, in the neighborhood. You can put in a zip code, an address. Here, they're talking about gas and hazardous liquid transmission pipelines. Again, there's a website here that you can go to and look at. The key on all of these items is to direct your client to be getting the information firsthand. You can look at it and see it and know what they're seeing, but you don't want to be transmitting it because these are independent agencies and they should be getting it directly from them. Right. So then they can't say that you told them something or you guided them to say that this was okay. When you're not an expert on gas lines, none of us are experts on these things. Stay within your lane. Letter F, condominium plan development disclosures. Again, these are important when you're buying a condo. They will get all the paperwork so that your client can review it. Again, it used to be that I looked at every single condo document when I was representing a buyer doing a condominium. Now, I always let the documents go directly from escrow to the client. And if the client has questions, then I either refer the client to the management company or I take their questions and I pass them on directly from what they've written. I try not to make any, I can't judge the financials of another HOA. I can't, I don't make decisions that this is a good HOA based on what I'm reading. But the important things that you do want your clients to think about is, are there pet restrictions? Are there parking restrictions? Are there smoking restrictions? Are there rental restrictions? Are there private transfer fees? These are the kind of things when a client's going to say, well, what should I look for when I'm reviewing the HOA documents? So you want to look for the main ones. And the big one is rental restrictions. That's one of the major ones. And number two is pet restrictions, because some HOAs have breed. You can't have a certain breed or a weight limit or a number of pets. But those are kind of, in my opinion, two of the main issues. I don't know if anybody else can think of anything different about that. When you're dealing with smaller condominium buildings, for example, a lot of the little buildings in Inglewood, you wanna get the information from the listing agent to find out, hey, do they have any reserves? Are they putting money away? Do they have a budget? Do they have regular meetings? Because all of these things are going to affect your financing. A lot of these smaller buildings aren't prepared and don't have reserves. So that then makes your loan more costly for your buyer. That's an unwarrantable condo, and they end up paying a higher interest rate. Buyer's investigation of the property. This all relates to the physical inspection period and the time period that the buyers have to review HOA documents, title documents, physical inspection. Your physical inspection could include your inspector coming in and reviewing the home. You might call in a roofer to check out the roof. You might call in a plumber because your home inspector has found something with regard to the plumbing. I always let my home inspector do the initial inspection as quickly as possible after the offer is accepted. I mean, literally, if I can get it done in the first couple of days, that's what I do. And then that home inspector is going to say, Mike, I saw termites in the attic. I saw rodents in the attic. You've got a plumbing issue here. You should get a roofer out to check this out. You might want to do a sewer inspection, check the line from the house to the street. So that's why I recommend getting your physical inspection done as quickly as possible. Title investing, again, we are not to give the buyers advice on how they should hold title. They should talk to an attorney or they can talk with the title company. Well, that's not something that we can be giving advice because it's technically legal advice. So we're back here to time periods and removal of contingencies. Again, you might want to shorten the period that the seller has to get you documents if it's a tight deal, but it defaults to 7 days, and then it gives the buyer 17 days to review it, to review everything. The key part about clause 14 is listing agents want to keep this section as tight as possible. They want to give the buyer 10 days, 12 days, not 17 days. And the reason for that is as soon as you get your repairs negotiated, then you kind of know if the deal's going to go. Excuse me. Because once everybody's agreed, we're buying the property, we're buying it as is. Okay, seller, you're going to give me a credit for $1,500 for this, or you're going to repair that. Then everybody knows this is what it is with the house. Then we're just waiting for appraisal and loan. So that's why you want to keep this as tight as possible. If here, as far as access to the property, 17 days is the default because it's 17 days up here. But you see Eric had changed it to 10 and 10 to match that period. Here, this is an important point here. Let's say we are 16 days in for the buyer to do their inspection. And at this point, the seller gives the buyer all the HOA documents, and they hadn't given them to him yet. So this section here, 14B3, says that the buyer, from the time the seller gives them a disclosure, the buyer gets 5 days to review it. And this comes in handy when you've got a tough deal that's going on. And let's say you're trying to stretch more time for your buyer and the seller hasn't given you something, you go with the flow there, because the seller might be pushing you to remove all your contingencies, and you're going to say, I'll remove all my contingencies except for the HOA documents because we just got them today and my buyer deserves the time to review them. Now it pisses people off, excuse my language, but it's the reality is it gives your buyer 5 more days to get their loan approved or whatever's going on. You know, that's why I bring that up. Rarely will you go in with clause C, removal of contingencies with offer, but you could. If it's a cash offer and it's an investor, you might go in with all contingencies removed except for a 3-day inspection period or a 5-day inspection period or something like that. These I usually stick with the boilerplate except for notice of buyer or seller to perform. On number 2, on E, I often put 5 days in, and more often than not, the other listing agent doesn't catch this. And so that means, for example, a few months ago, I was in a heated negotiation at the end of a transaction, and the buyer gave me a notice, the seller gave me a notice to perform, and it was defective because they said 2 days and I had 5 days in the contract. So I waited for the 2 days to be up, and then I told the listing agent, I said, your notice to perform is defective. So she then had to give me another notice, which gave me 5 more days to work out what I needed to work out. So that's why I recommend putting 5 in there. A good agent, like all of you, I hope, would counter that out and tell the buyers no if you're the listing agent, but I'd say probably half of the listing agents miss it. This is an important one, final verification of condition of property. The property is supposed to be ready for the buyers to see 5 days prior to close of escrow. Often it isn't. Often the sellers are still packing or something's going on. The goal is to get your buyer in there as close to the time that they're going to close and the seller's out, because you want to see the house in the condition that it's going to be once the sellers gets their things out. This is also a time where you're going to go in and you're going to review repairs at this time. And when you're doing a repair request for your buyer, you also want the seller to provide you with receipts to make sure that things are paid. Some things might have a warranty. Some things you want proof that the work's done and that it's been paid for. I had a deal a number of years ago where it was a flip, and I didn't even think to ask the question because it was everything in the house was changed out. Well, the seller didn't pay the carpeting vendor. Now, the carpeting vendor came back to my buyer after we closed and said they wanted the money. The buyer doesn't have to pay it, but that vendor went ahead and put a lien on the house. So it's a nuisance for my client who bought the house. And I didn't even think to get clarity, because at that time, the title companies were actually clearing some of that stuff. But now I think differently about those things. Prorations of property taxes and other items. So oftentimes your buyers are going to want to know, you know, what am I paying? Am I paying the full month of the HOA because I'm moving in on the 15th, or I'm moving in on June 15th and the taxes have been paid until June 30th? It's all going to be prorated. It's all on a daily basis. So while the seller lives there, the seller will pay the HOA and the taxes, and they'll get credited for something that they paid ahead, and vice versa. The buyer will only pay from the day they start moving in. Compensation. Compensation is should always be written in a separate agreement. Now, if you're representing a buyer for a property in our MLS, you are protected. When you write that offer up, for example, to Rodeo Realty in this offer, she's part of our MLS, the property's in the MLS, so you don't need to write up a separate commission agreement. But if you're doing an off-market property, or you're doing something from another area, you want to write up a commission agreement between Keller Williams Inglewood and Rodeo Realty Moreno Valley, or whoever you're doing the deal with, because they're outside of our jurisdiction. So joint escrow instructions to escrow holder. Again, keep in mind that this document is, let me make sure it still says that, is California Residential Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Instructions. So many agents think that they don't open escrow until the independent escrow company opens. The minute this offer is signed and both parties have agreed, you've opened escrow. So the fact that you haven't opened it with the independent company on the side is neither here nor there. You've opened escrow. So you will, in your career, some listing agent is going to come to you and try to get out of a deal because maybe they got a better buyer after your offer was accepted and you haven't opened escrow yet. You've opened escrow the minute this document is signed. So 21 and 22. 21 is where we talked about not putting more than 3% down. So on a single family residential, which is 1 to 4 units, the buyer on day 30 could walk away from the deal and not have any other repercussion other than paying the 3% of the purchase price. Seller can't come after them for more money or more damages. If both parties initial here and agree to these terms, then that means that the risk that the buyer has is 3%. Now, buyers, especially first-time buyers, are going to be like with you, I don't want to lose my deposit. I don't want to lose my deposit. Keep in mind, if they haven't removed their contingencies in a deal and you've gone past the 17th day or you've gone past the 21st day, their deposit is still safe. Until they remove their contingency, they have a right to cancel that agreement. There will be instances where you push the limits on these issues. Again, buyers and sellers, when they initial 22A and B, agree that they will go to mediation first and arbitration second. They agree to it here, but they don't always do it. I have a deal in the office right now where the seller wouldn't close the deal. The buyer served them mediation form, which is a CAR form that we help them fill out. And the seller didn't respond. The buyer then had to go to arbitration. And now they're waiting for the seller to respond. So what happens here in the case of a seller who doesn't want, or a party that won't mediate or arbitrate, if you go to litigation and you refuse to do these two things, you can't get any legal fees from the other party if you win. But if you go through mediation and you go through arbitration, then I believe the winning party does have a right to get legal fees from the other side. Always keep in mind everything in writing, always in writing, not texting, not emailing. Well, emailing is good. I prefer email to texting. I also, as a point of new agents, I recommend if you can, which I know you can do it with a Mac platform, set up texting on your computer. And that way you have a text chain of everything that you've talked about either with your client or the listing agent, and it's all in one place. And like, for example, my phone crosses over to my computer. So if I pull up Adam Najad, I'm going to see all my texts with Adam, and I can print them out if I need to. And I have had to do that in the past. But emailing is stronger and better. Always when you're sending out an email to a listing agent, a buyer, put in 5815 Doverwood. So I always put the numbers and the street. I don't put the whole address, but I put something so I can do a quick check to find all the emails related to this transaction. I always relate it back to the address, and I try to do that on every single email. The other thing, if you get Twilio through, which is an added thing that you can add to your command, you can start texting through command, and then your texts are right there with your client. So anytime you send something, but in that instance, you've got to go through command to do the text. I'm just starting to learn it. I've just set it up, so I'm not very familiar with it yet. I'll know more as we go along. Selection of service providers. Again, we as brokers don't necessarily, we don't guarantee the performance of vendors, but the buyer and seller may select any vendors of their choosing. We recommend vendors. I always make sure that my clients know that any vendor I recommend, I do not get any kickbacks, no referral fees. I just recommend people that I know can get the job done and that I've done business with in the past. These again are mostly legalese. Section 30, what's going to come up most often that you're going to have a question about is days prior and days after. That's G and H. So if we sign a contract today, May 13th, and we have a 30-day escrow, day one is tomorrow. It's not today, it's the day after the act started. So keep in mind, your physical inspection period starts the next day, your loan, your appraisal, your closing. So oftentimes people try to count the same day as they sign the contract. It's the next day. Then days prior, so let's say I am a listing agent and the buyer isn't performing and they haven't they're not removing contingencies timely. So this Friday, they're supposed to remove their loan contingency. I can give them, if the contract says you can give notice 2 days before, then I could give them notice today, even though the contingency isn't up until Friday. But keep in mind, I wrote in 5 days, so I would have to give them 5 days notice if the 5 days stuck. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, 5 days prior.
5 days prior, correct. Then your expiration of your offer, again, you put your name and the company, normally a date, and then I put a time in. If you put nothing, it's going to just be 3 days after the offer was submitted. This is, your buyer's name, your seller's name, and then the company name for everybody. Now here, if you're working with another agent in the office, for example, my name should be here with Eric, and then my license number. He's the lead agent on this, but then he's on my team, so I should be on that with him. The buyer's inspection advisory is number 9 on our list. Again, this document automatically populates with with your purchase agreement when you do it. You don't have to go find it. It came in with the document. This is talking about all different things that a buyer needs to think about, look at when they are purchasing a property. California Consumer Privacy Act, again, this comes automatically with your purchase agreement, and that is added. This is a brand new form that just came out last December about, it's a state level form that's required. On number 10, RCSD. This was that form that I pulled in from the side. And the RCSD, it's either for a buyer or a seller. So in this instance, it says buyer, RCSD for buyer representative. So the reason we have this form is Tree Topper is an LLC. So we're going to fill the name of the company in. We're going to go down here and we're going to check LLC. And then typically, if you're working with an investor, you're going to want to get a copy of their authorizing resolution that says they have the right to sign on behalf of Tree Topper LLC. So I'm going to say is attached or is not attached. The other time that you could use this form is a trust. Let's say your buyer is buying in the name of a trust, or the seller is a trust. You're going to fill that in here. Or it could be a probate, and that would be section D. And then down here, managing member would be John Doe or Freddie Mac or whoever in their title, managing member. Then we've got two new forms. Number 11 is the coronavirus addendum. So again, remember I said that you can use the abbreviation. So I go over here to all forms. I'm going to type in CVA. So there's a CVA for a purchase, and there's also a CVA for a rental. So we want the purchase one. And then number 11, oh, that was 12. 11 is PED. This is the property entry, advisory, and declaration. So we'll go through these. Again, there's one for rental and one for regular purchase. So this form right here is being changed almost weekly, but basically you're going to fill in the property address. This is where the seller is going to represent that they don't have COVID or they haven't been exposed to it recently, et cetera. And then the people who are going in are also going to be disclosing this. So you're going to need one that has the seller's name on it. You're going to need one that has the buyer's name on it. And then there's going to be one with your name on it, your broker agent. You can initial, if you're representing the buyer, you can initial down here on behalf of the broker. This form, I've just been told the other day, we need to use this every time we go in the property. It can't be the same form for multiple times. So it's a little bit of annoying, but it is what it is. And you're going to see in the listings in the MLS, under private remarks, the majority of them today say you must submit the PED form prior to setting up the appointment or at the time of the setting up the appointment. And then these forms need to be saved and uploaded with your file to be kept forever. The last one that I'm recommending right now to use on your purchase agreements is the coronavirus addendum and amendment. Now, you're counters on this, but I still think it's a good form to use right now, because if you go into the offer with this form, it's a lot easier to negotiate at the beginning than to negotiate it when you need more time. So basically, the key section, in my opinion, is this section 4A. So I'm saying that, for example, if we defaulted, it's saying that the buyer can extend their contingencies 30 days after they've delivered the NUCC form. And the NUCC form is a form of notice of unforeseen coronavirus circumstances. So that form, it could say buyer just lost their job, appraiser can't get out to the house. We'll pull the form up and go through it. But again, I just wrote up an offer today, and I put in loan and appraisal because we've already done our inspection on the property and we're good with it. But if something in the market changes because we can't get the appraiser out there or the loan takes longer, I want to know that the seller will give us an extension. Again, down here, it would be an extension to close escrow later, a one-day extension, a one-time extension for 30 days.
Question.
Those are the
What
two
about your contingencies that you wrote in the offer?
So this is in addition to. Okay. So for example, if we wanted this to happen, this word here, extension of time, is upon delivery of the NUCC. So I'm going to click on the NUCC and show you what that is. This means that something has happened in the transaction that we need more time. So it's not automatic that they get this. It's that they have to have a reason. So this is, here's the form. So notice of unforeseen coronavirus circumstance. So I would check buyer, and it might be that they've lost their job. And so then maybe we would have to cancel. It could be that the notary couldn't get in, or the lender needs more time. Stay-at-home orders. So they couldn't get the pest control in, or they couldn't get the appraiser in. So it's very specific reasons as to why. It's not an automatic. So, there is a case right now that Tom Corcoran has. The wife is in a convalescent home. Oh, wow. And she had a stroke when they opened escrow, after they opened escrow. The convalescent home will not let the notary come in for her to sign the paperwork. They said they don't allow anybody from the outside to come in. And so he's sitting there with a transaction that he can't close, and the convalescent home won't let anybody in, and they won't let their notary sign anything. So this is the type of, that's an instance that you couldn't predict. He couldn't have predicted when they started the deal. So it's not like, oh, I just don't want to buy your property now. There's got to be a valid reason. So if we go back to our sheet, we're at the final 13, 14, and 15. Number 13 is proof of funds for the buyer deposit. So you want to make sure, as I said earlier, that you have a copy of a bank statement, asset statement, 401k, etc. You go with your offer. Make sure that you black out the account numbers. And a lot of buyers will send it to you with their account number on it, not thinking twice about it. Number two, just a tidbit for you with buyers, when the buyers submit their asset statements to their lender, some buyers will leave pages off. You must submit every page from your bank statement, even if it's blank. So if your Wells Fargo statement says 7 pages and page 7 is blank, the lender's going to want to see page 7 blank. Lastly, the pre-approval letter from your lender. And 15 is a letter from the buyer to the seller. So in an instance where you have a buyer that is purchasing and you want them to write something nice to the seller about what they like about the property. It's our first house. We love the school neighborhood. We love your kitchen, blah, 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 blah. Letters turn offers. They really, if it comes down to 2 offers side by side and they're equal and the seller gets emotional from a letter, your buyer will get the deal. And I went way over time, I see. Anybody have any other questions before we close out?
No, that's great.
And I was told that this will all be taped, and so it'll be somewhere that you can go back and look at. We'll find out from Brandon. I appreciate all of you for coming in. Let me look and see if I see any questions. So Demetrius asked if the solar panels are transferable. I think I answered that question, but typically the lease agreements are transferable. And if you guys want to send me, or you know what, I'll just send my form out, the form that I use for the term sheet. I'll send it out to everybody in the office. So you have a blank one, and I'll do it in Excel and I'll do it in numbers. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day. Be safe.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye.